Jerrold Tarog should make a movie about the current presidential race. It would be a comedy. Heneral Luna is directed by Jerrold Tarog, written by him, Henry Francia, and E.A. Rocha, and stars John Arcilla, Mon Confiado, Noni Bencamino, Mylene Dizon, and everybody ever. And Heneral Luna is the story of General Antonio Luna, who worked under then President Emilio Aguinaldo during the Philippine-American War. Luna believes in the promises of the Philippine Revolution, and he is very against Aguinaldo's plan to pretty much sign over the Philippines to the Americans. So this movie really is Heneral Luna realizing that his biggest enemies aren't the Americans but his own countrymen. Now, I have never ever heard in my life people talk about a movie more than they've talked about Heneral Luna. Whether or not this appears on my top 15 list, I'm not gonna spoil that. When people look back at 2015, they are going to think of Heneral Luna. This movie was pretty much a milestone in Philippine cinema. And while I personally think there are a couple of issues in here that stop it from being really great, I really enjoyed Heneral Luna. It has some incredible acting and some of the best directing from Jerrold Tarog, which is saying a lot. Now, period films have always been a challenge for Philippine cinema, but I've honestly never felt more immersed in the Philippine past than in Heneral Luna. The sets and the costumes have this raw, worn, organic quality about them, and the cinematography is often sweeping and grand. And the practical effects are very top-notch also for us. Some of the visual effects, some of the CGI and the blood effects still aren't super convincing, but that's okay because it's mostly like real explosions and whatnot, and it all looks fantastic. Sound has also always been a challenge for us, I think, but it's surprisingly clean throughout pretty much the entirety of this movie, especially in the battle scenes. The battle scenes sound big and chaotic and amazing. And Jerrold Tarog, who pretty much does his own music for all his movies, his musical score here is more traditionally orchestrated than his other movies, but it works. I find that it works best when it sets the atmosphere for more tragic scenes. And this movie is edited incredibly well for a movie with so many characters. We get to see conflict from multiple sides. It's not just always Luna's point of view. And there are certain moments of tension, especially near the end, that are very suspenseful. And I think the best scene that can highlight how good the editing in this movie is a certain telegram exchange between Heneral Luna and General Mascardo. And this entire sequence is brilliant. It's so funny. You really get a sense of these two just hating each other, even if they're almost never in the same scene together. And the writing overall is very funny, but also the dialogue is just dense with all these themes. And thankfully enough, all these themes don't really weigh down on the viewer because they tell a very condensed story. This is not a biopic about Heneral Luna's life from birth to death. It's really just a certain portion of his life, and I really like that they just focus it on that. And ultimately, this movie is about Luna and Aguinaldo. Like, you really get the themes from the two of them. And there are just a dozen actors who shine in this movie, even with their limited screen time for some of them. Noni Bencamino hits multiple emotions just through this fierce intensity that he puts on. Mylene Dizon conveys this real sense of fatigue and history in her own limited role. Epi Quizon, who plays Apolinario Mabini, doesn't even need to stand. Like, he's amazing already just sitting down. Archie Alemania is he plays one of Luna's right-hand men, and he's instantly likable just right off the bat. Leo Martinez, I thought, was perfectly cast as Pedro Paterno. He's exactly what I imagined Pedro Paterno to be like. Bing Pimentel commands respect immediately also in the one scene she's in. She manages to be like the bigger person in the room, even with Luna there. Paolo Avellino, I could talk a lot about him, but you can just hear women swoon at the mention of his name, but he's really good as well. But this movie really does belong to Mon Confiado and John Arcilla. Mon Confiado plays Emilio Aguinaldo, and he has so many layers to him. Like, he's arguably the antagonist of this movie, but he plays Aguinaldo in such a way that you really do understand him, where he's coming from. You might hate him, but you get why he has to do the things he does in this movie. And John Arcilla is just a pure tour de force throughout this movie. He's insane, he's super likable, but at the same time he's very reprehensible for some of his actions as well. And this forms such an interesting dichotomy because Aguinaldo is so calculated but sympathetic at the same time, but then Heneral Luna is very impassioned about what he believes in, but at the same time he's very reckless as well. It's a really interesting dynamic. And Jerrold Tarog really just approaches all these different scenes with different techniques, and they all work. His action scenes are really good. They're very epic in scale. But for me, even the verbal sparring is even more exciting. Like, there are certain scenes where it's just Luna and Aguinaldo and all these people sitting around one table, and the dialogue is just fantastic. And the two other scenes I think that are real highlights are, there's one flashback scene that is just one take, and it moves constantly through this ever-changing set. And that was just so innovative to see. It was such a surprise, and I think it really, really worked. And I thought the ending of this movie was very, very haunting. There were just hints of like almost magic realism in there. It was pretty scary. It was very sad at times. It was very funny. And Jerrold Tarog really knows how to balance all those tones. And he doesn't direct this movie like an indie movie. It's very, very accessible to all social classes. And it's clear that everyone in this production had a lot of heart. And the fact that they managed to reflect our own political climate today in this movie is just a fantastic achievement. If I have any issues with the movie, I guess that the depiction of Americans in this movie borders on stereotypical. I mean, there's no way we were gonna get nominated for an Oscar if we had Americans acting like this. But my bigger issue is that the idea behind the character of Joven is ballsy, but it's a bit too on the nose. He's supposed to represent us, the audience, and it's a bit too obvious. And also at the same time, the character of Joven just doesn't make sense in context of the story. Why would Heneral Luna keep this kid around who's interviewing him even in the midst of war? It doesn't really make sense. But with that said, I think Heneral Luna is still a really, really, really good movie. It really gives me hope for the future of our cinema, not just in terms of filmmakers trying out more ambitious projects like this, but also it gives me hope in the viewers that we'll finally be able to kind of understand and process and apply to our own lives these kinds of stories. So those are my thoughts on Heneral Luna. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.